Hello and welcome to another Atonement Philosopher video. This time I am going to return to discussions about the Bible, about theology, about exegesis, and in this particular case problems with Mark's crucifixion, death and atonement. This came from a question I was asked when I was appearing in an interview on Derek Lambert's Myth Vision. It comes from a fellow YouTuber called Scholarvid who sent me a personal email with this question in it. My understanding is that in Mark 15:34, God abandons Jesus before he dies on the cross. Quote, "At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani,' which means, 'My God, why have you forsaken me?'" Mark 15:34. If Christian atonement theology relies on the fact that only the death of the divine nature of Jesus would be powerful enough to atone for the sins of humankind originated with Adam and Eve, how can the mere death of human Jesus fulfill that requirement? It's a really interesting question. So the first thing to say is that the atonement doesn't make any sense, and I lay this out in my book, The Resurrection, A Critical Examination of the Easter Story. Ta-da. The whole resurrection narrative supervenes on the idea of the atonement, which means that the whole resurrection depends upon atonement making sense. If you get no payment for sins, you get no reason for Jesus dying other than our secular ones. He annoyed the Jews or he annoyed the Romans. So this is really important stuff. The atonement needs to make sense for the resurrection to be a coherent narrative. And what theologians and apologists do then is to try to invent some manner in which the atonement makes sense, obviously. You know, this has been a 2,000-year process that has turned out a whole array of different and sometimes or often mutually exclusive theories. And still no one agrees. No one agrees on what theory of atonement holds. And this is a massive problem. So what I'm getting at here is that it doesn't matter, when Jesus was abandoned. The whole thing is nonsensical. Jesus might have appeared to have died merely as a human at this point, and Christians could simply invent how this still constitutes atonement. There's not enough clarity to dictate that one must believe either from this Markan account or from all the other Gospels together, hence why theologians infer and deduce what they think might be the case. Or, the point here is that the atonement is made up. I mean, that's pretty obvious to me. It's a made up thing to explain something that does not need explaining, and indeed cannot reasonably be explained. How an omni-God, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, all powerful, all knowing, all loving, who designed humanity and with all our flaws, knew everything that would come to pass, all the hypotheticals, if I did this then this would happen, if I did this then this would happen, and that's if I created this kind of world would eventuate, everything that would come to pass, and created us anyway. Why would this God somehow require payment for the outcome of the faulty design that he knew would come to pass but decided to bring into existence anyway? I mean, it's beyond me how that can make sense and why you would need atonement at all. So whether this payment makes sense as a human sacrifice of Jesus or a divine sacrifice of Jesus is neither here nor there. It makes no sense either way, because the atonement, I think, is a nonsensical theological thing. Perhaps it makes slightly less sense in Jesus as a man dying. I would agree. I think this is even more problematic. If the man of Jesus died, but like the soul or the essence of the divine Jesus doesn't die, obviously doesn't die, because Jesus, like the God part, Jesus can't die. All you have is a man dying, somehow atoning for sins. Thing is, I think Mark saw Jesus as a Messiah. So the Messiah dies, who is albeit an exalted human, then some kind of messianic atonement comes about. I mean, Jesus believed that atonement took place in the sacrifice of a goat at Yom Kippur. Sorry, not Jesus, Jews. Jews believed that atonement took place in the sacrifice of a goat at Yom Kippur. So a human exalted Messiah figure being sacrificed should do the trick. So although to us looking back as skeptics, thinking, why would a human dying, as in Jesus the human dying, do the job of atonement? Surely it should be the divine Jesus dying. Jews at the time believed that a goat would do the trick. Okay, so none of it makes sense. Like, the goat makes no sense, the human makes no sense doing atonement, and the divine sacrifice would make no sense. I mean, none of it makes sense. But if you're going to believe a goat does it, then I think a human Jesus doing it is all right. I mean, it's not great, but it could work. So the whole nature of the phrase Jesus used here is interesting and problematic, and this is a further problem. And it's using Old Testament Hebrew Bible scripture, Psalm 22, why hast thou forsaken me? Perhaps to validate or prophesy Jesus' death in some way, even though the psalm is completely taken out of context and nigh on impossible to attach to Jesus in any prophetic sort of manner. If you want more details on that, my interview with Derek Lambert, again on Myth Vision, the one called Cherry Picking Prophecy, is well worth looking at, because we dive into this in some kind of depth. But it does make absolutely no sense of the Holy Trinity. Why would God be talking to himself and claiming he had forsaken himself? This makes sense and I think Mark saw Jesus as a Messiah and not as God. That makes sense as a messianic figure going, why have you forsaken me? But as part of the Holy Trinity saying, why have you forsaken me? It just makes no sense. Nothing is coherent here unless we understand that the gospel writer actually believes, again, Jesus is a Messiah and not God himself. And I think all the synoptics do this. And it's only John who starts to take us on this journey towards the Holy Trinity as later developed. And that Jesus was God, in full divine form in a human incarnation. So, this idea of the Logos, the Word existing originally, pre-existing, all of human existence, if you like. John starts that ball rolling. So I think really, to conclude, I think the problem evinced in the question that Scholarvid is given emerges from applying a later kind of christological framework back onto those words and understanding the scenario in a framework that didn't exist, I think, for Mark. And I think Mark's quote shows that there is this development of Christology. That starts with a kind of, you could argue with Paul starts it with this messianic understanding of who Jesus was. But it's a really interesting question. I mean, whatever way you look at it, it doesn't make sense. Whether Jesus' sacrifice is just as a human, whether it's fully as a divine being, whether it's a Messiah, if you believe a goat can do the job, then any of those things can do the job. But the simple fact of the matter, for me at least, is that atonement doesn't make any sense. Not when you have an omni-God creating everything with full divine foreknowledge, and everything that God creates is contingent upon God. So if you're going to create flawed human beings with sin, and you've designed that into them and created that world anyway, then what are you doing demanding payment for it? It's just bizarre. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and question everything. Take care. Stay safe.